what is going on? Welcome to the Fantasy Headliners. I'm Kyle Richardson, and if I sound excited, it is because I am, because we now have our first look at the 2019 NFL schedule. We know who is playing where, bye weeks, all of those good things. We have a ton of information in front of us to start dissecting. If you're already a part of Headliner Nation, you know how we like to do it here. We like to keep these videos short and sweet and get a ton of information to you. If you're not a part of Headliner Nation, hit that subscribe button below. Let us know in the comments if you subscribe today so we can welcome you personally to Headliner Nation. But don't worry, if this is a ton of information to go through, number one, you can just watch it again. Feel more than welcome to. But number two, we have that advertisement like right down here, okay? The 2019 Fantasy Football Draft Guide by the Fantasy Headliners is on pre-order right now, and I can tell you a lot of this information will be in that draft guide, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into it. So make sure you pre-order that right now. Only $19.99. You don't get a better value in the fantasy football industry than what we have for you this season with the draft guide. Let's start moving right along. Let's start talking about what is going to be happening with this schedule. Okay, we're going to be breaking down a couple of different things, including kind of a strength of schedule look based off some numbers from last year. But first off, let's start heading into these bye weeks here. So bye weeks are really important to start taking a look at right away, especially when you're doing your draft. Some people like to draft around their bye weeks. I don't do that. I just draft the best players and then I figure out my bye weeks later. But if you don't like to do that, you like to know what's going on with the bye weeks. We know those now. The biggest bye week to take a look at is week 10 when we got the Broncos, Texans, Jaguars, Patriots, Eagles, and Redskins all on byes. The good news is I don't think we lose a ton of value in those weeks in terms of fantasy football owners. Obviously, with the Texans, you're going to be missing maybe a Lamar Miller, DeAndre Hopkins. With the Jaguars, you could be missing Leonard Fournette. The Pats are going to have some weapons, obviously, the Eagles and the Redskins. But really some of these bye weeks that cause a lot of issues, I think. Week 7 is going to be a tough one with the Panthers. No Christian McCaffrey, no Cam Newton. DJ Morphy's having a good season, obviously. With the Browns, a ton of talent there. OBJ, Jarvis Landry, Baker Mayfield, Nick Chubb, all of them will be missing. From the Steelers, we're going to be missing Roethlisberger, James Conner, Jalen Samuels if he does well, Vance McDonald, who I really like at tight end this year. Obviously, their wide receivers there, Juju Smith-Schuster. And then the Bucs offense is looking up as well. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Jameis Winston is if he does well, OJ Howard. A lot of missing pieces in week 7, and that's really my biggest week that we're going to have to fight through for fantasy owners. There's just so much talent in that week that you're going to end up losing. Obviously, you could end up losing. Week 12, there's some talent there, obviously, that you could end up losing as well. With weeks 4 and 5, only 2 teams each week, Jets, 49ers, Lions, Dolphins. Week 9, Falcon, Bengals, Rams, and Saints also have a lot of talent that you're going to be losing there. But again, I think that Week 7 one is going to be the toughest for fantasy owners, especially if for some reason you own multiple players from these teams. So Week 7 will be the one that we really want to try and maneuver around. If you're drafting, again, I draft and then figure out the bye weeks later. If you're not like that, then this is one to definitely keep in mind as you're going through those. And then Week 10 having the most teams is another one that you also want to pay attention to. But just kind of a quick breakdown of the bye weeks, that's what we'll be looking at there. Moving on from bye weeks, the dreaded Thursday night football, right? Thursday night football is an issue a lot of the time because those seem to be the low-scoring games. A lot of things can go differently on Thursday Night Football than what we expect to happen. In Week 1, we got Green Bay at Chicago to kick off the season, Tampa Bay at Carolina in Week 2, Tennessee at Jacksonville. That one doesn't bother me as much, not nearly as many things there as I'll be missing in terms of like Green Bay and Chicago. We could be missing a lot. Tampa Bay, Carolina, there could be a little bit of an issue there. Philly at Green Bay in Week 4, the Rams at Seattle in Week 5, Giants at New England in Week 6, Kansas City at Denver in Week 7, Washington at Minnesota in Week 8, Kirk Cousins getting to face his former team. In Week 9, we got San Francisco at Arizona, LA at Oakland, the Chargers at Oakland in Week 10, Pittsburgh at Cleveland, a huge game. That's going to be a huge game on Thursday Night Football with a lot of offensive players. Week 12, Indianapolis at Houston, another big offensive week for those players. And then Week 13, we've got those Thanksgiving Day games. Week 13, we've got Buffalo at Dallas, Chicago at Detroit, New Orleans at Atlanta. Thursday football for Thanksgiving is a little bit different for me. Those players love playing on Thanksgiving Day. A lot of them do. Anyway, it's a little bit different feel. It's a little bit easier to get up for those games just because of the atmosphere around that day. So those don't worry me as much. And then week 14, we've got Dallas at Chicago. If you've got Zeke starting in that game, that could be a tough matchup for him. And then week 15, the Jets at the Ravens. Week 16, we don't know yet. There's a lot of different flex things that can happen with that week 15 schedule, week 16 schedule, so we won't know those for a while. But Thursday Night Football, we always get a ton of questions. Hey, Kyle. Hey, Jake. What's happening with Thursday Night Football? Should I sit these guys or should I start them? Thursday Night Football always throws a wrinkle in things. That's why it's important to keep an eye out on these matchups as well. And then with Thursday Night Football, we have international games going on this year. We have Week 5, Chicago at Oakland. Week 6, Carolina at Tampa Bay. Week 8, Cincinnati at the Rams. Week 9, Houston at Jacksonville. All 4 of those games will be in London. And then Week 11, KC at the Los Angeles Chargers. That's going to be in Mexico. So those London games, again, those 4 London games, those really concern me. I don't really like starting those London games because the players aren't really used to it. They head over to London. The game started at like 9 a.m. our time. It's even earlier than that. So, you've got Oakland, who's going to be there. They're going to be flying from the West Coast all the way to London, so it's really going to be even earlier for them. The Rams will also be a little bit of an issue. Now, the Mexico game, Week 11 in Mexico, that game last year ended up being canceled and moved back to Kansas City. One of the best games that we saw all year long between Kansas City and the Rams. That was an absolute masterpiece of it. I might have said at Kansas City or the Rams. I apologize. I'm blanking on where it ended up coming back to. But one of the best games of the season was supposed to be in Mexico. It ended up coming back to the States because of field condition issues. This year, Kansas City at the Chargers, and that's going to be in Mexico City there at their stadium. So that I'm not nearly as worried about that one as the London games. The London games always worry me. Those along with Thursday Night Football. So, you got to be careful with those when you're setting your lineup. We'll get closer and closer as we get into those weeks. We can talk a little bit more in depth about them. I'm not nearly as concerned about drafting those teams right now. So if we're talking about whether or not we draft Thursday, that's nothing. But again, it's fun to talk about these schedules, throw different things out there, and get into that. So let's also get going. Let's look into our strength of schedule information here. So let's go ahead and switch this over, and we've got our strength of schedule. So this chart that you're looking at right here, everybody that's in green was in the bottom third in terms of points, scoring defense last year. Everyone that's in the yellow was in the middle third, and everyone's in red was in the top third of least amount of points given up on defense. Now, teams have made a lot of changes over the offseason. Obviously, these things won't matter nearly as much in the coming months, but still sitting down and looking at it in terms of teams from last season, we will update this for the draft guide, and we'll include a lot of information from also the signings and updated defensive rosters. So again, this is based off last season. We're going to be doing a lot of updated things though in the draft guide. This is just a sneak peek, because again, we love to talk about the schedule being released. Start with Arizona. One tough matchup really the entire season based on last year, and that's at Baltimore in week 2. Other than that, a lot of really good matchups for them. Arizona, potentially with Kyler Murray at quarterback. David Johnson, we want to see him get back into it at running back, a new system there under Cliff Kingsbury. Atlanta, the Falcons, they're going to have some tough matchups. 4 of the first 5 matchups are top 10 defensive last season. At Minnesota, at Indianapolis, Tennessee, and at Houston. Those games where they're even away. So if you're drafting Atlanta players, be prepared for a potentially slow start. But not only that, if you're looking to add Atlanta players, you can trade for them after that, because Jacksonville being their lone tough matchup later on. Baltimore also looking pretty good. New England and Houston right there in the middle, but they have 4 really good weeks to start the season. Their playoff schedule, week 13, week 14, 15, and 16, depending on how you do your leagues. 14, 15, 16 are what you're typically going to see. Some 13, some 17, but they have 3 really good matchups there in the last 5 weeks. Looking at the Buffalo Bills now, again, a really good schedule to start, but then they get New England and Tennessee, and they have they have a bad playoff schedule at the end. Carolina, they have Houston and Jacksonville, Tennessee, Indianapolis there on their schedule, a decent playoff schedule. Jumping down, going to Chicago. Chicago has some tough matchups there, but then going down below that and looking at Cincinnati. Cincinnati has an awesome playoff schedule if you throw out that New England matchup there, because they have the Jets, Cleveland, Miami, and Cleveland. Now I expect Cleveland's defense to be a little bit better this season, but at least we're getting a chance to look at, based on points allowed last year, this could be a really good playoff matchup for a lot of teams. Same thing for Cleveland themselves. Just talked about them. They do have Baltimore there in week 16, but you have Cincinnati, Arizona, and then Cincinnati again. You even have that week 12 matchup, Miami there, so that will be a really nice one for them. Looking at Dallas, Dallas has a very tough finish to the season. So from week 10 and on, you have a top 10, a middle third, a top 10, a middle third, a top 10, and then 3 middle thirds there from last season. So they could potentially have a very rough end of the season. That doesn't bode well for my Ezekiel Elliott love. He's going to have to make up the majority of his points to begin the year, because that's going to be a tough finish. But I'm not going to give up any hope yet. Again, we will update this and look more at 2019 numbers. Denver, holy moly here. Look at Denver, a team that has Joe Flacco at quarterback now. Teams are still looking at, Philip Lindsay. Does Royce Freeman make a breakout this year? What's going to happen? Look at these matchups. Chicago, Jacksonville, the Chargers, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Minnesota, Chargers, Houston. Oh, that is a tough stretch of games there for a team that doesn't have the best offense in the world. That's making me a little bit nervous about Denver. I'm going to be breaking this down and more when the website goes live. Again, the Fantasy Headliners will go live here during draft night next Thursday. So keep an eye out for that. Might have an article coming on that. Detroit, also some tough games here. A really tough stretch, week 10 through week 14. At Chicago, Dallas, at Washington, Chicago, at Minnesota. So for those of you that are hoping for Kerryon Johnson love or a Matt Stafford bounce back, that's going to be tough. Green Bay has some nice middle portions of the season, but still a lot of tough matchups along the way. That's why they need to work on that offense, get Aaron Rodgers as many playmakers as possible. Houston also going to have a lot of tough matchups this year. Indianapolis is going to have a lot of tough matchups this year. Jacksonville, still some very tough matchups for them. Kind of this middle part of the lineup that we're looking at, a lot of tough matchups. We're going to jump all the way down to the Los Angeles Rams, a team that obviously has one of the best offenses in all of football. They have a pretty easy schedule if you're looking at defenses from last year, because it's not until week 11 and 12 that they get some top 10 defenses in Chicago and Baltimore. They get a couple of decent weeks after that, and then at Dallas. So the Rams could be off to a very good start. This is a team that you might want to invest in to begin the season, and this is changing some of my viewpoints on Todd Gurley a little bit. Miami, for as bad as their offense is going to be, Baltimore, New England, Dallas, and the Chargers to begin the season. However, I don't mind that too much. They're probably going to be playing from behind quite often, and I'm a Kenyon Drake fan this year. Kenyon Drake could see a lot of work there. Minnesota gets off to a really nice start. Atlanta, Green Bay, Oakland. Then they're at Chicago, at the New York Giants. Some really nice matchups there for them to begin the season. New England, kind of the same scenario. They don't really have that tough matchup until Baltimore in week 9 in terms of defenses that they'll be playing. Then they do have Dallas and Houston after that. New England, with their lack of weapons there, this could be a really good start for them, especially if they need to if they draft a rookie wide receiver or a rookie tight end. They have Austin Seferian-Jenkins. If they're trying to get Josh Gordon back, a lot of different things there. But that easy schedule could be good for them. New Orleans, tough schedule. The New York Giants, this could be tough for Saquon Barkley. However, when you get to the end of the season, week 13 and on, their schedule gets much better, a clear view through the playoffs. New York Jets, interesting about the New York Jets, they actually don't play one game in the Western time zones. All of their games will be in Eastern time zones this year, which is always good looking at that, because a lot of times when these Eastern teams can go out to the Western border, it can be a little bit of a throw off for them, but they get to stay here in the East the entire time. Oakland, a lot of people have been talking about that offense, obviously with Antonio Brown there. What are they going to do at running back? Are they going to add another wide receiver? They have tough matchups, a few tough matchups to begin the season and even for the playoffs. So Oakland is a team that could have some issues. Philadelphia, I like this start here because I want to see Jordan Howard get going early against Atlanta, Green Bay, and the Jets. Could be some good matchups. That Jets defense, though, is much improved. Pittsburgh is going to have some tough games. New England, Chicago, Baltimore, and the Chargers here to begin the season. But then after that, it clears out a little bit for them. Seattle is another really good team to look at. Baltimore and Minnesota being the two lone top 10 scoring defenses from last season. The Rams could be a potential shootout. Carolina could be a good matchup. Arizona will be a good matchup. San Francisco will be a good matchup. Some really good matchups there to end the season in the playoffs. And San Francisco themselves, only one top 10 matchup at Baltimore, not until week 13. So if Jimmy Garoppolo can be healthy and the offense can get going, they have a lot of opportunities there. Tampa Bay, clear sailing for the most part to begin the year. Tough one at Tennessee. But then when the playoffs get here, fantasy football playoffs, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Houston, tough matchups there to end the season. Tennessee, Derrick Henry. I'm a Derrick Henry truther this year. I have hated him in years past, but this year I'm going to buy into them. Going to be a tough one, though. Indianapolis and Jacksonville there at the beginning. The Chargers, then Jacksonville and Indianapolis again. And then Houston here. A lot of tough matchups. And then Houston again at the very end of the season. That could mean, the key for Tennessee this year is going to be wearing down opposing defenses, running the football, controlling the clock. If they can do that, that's all right. But they could have some tough matchups. And then the Washington Redskins, not expecting a ton out of them. Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis are going to be spitting a lot of carries. But, however, after their bye week, coming out of the bye week, they get the Jets, Detroit, Carolina, Green Bay, Philly, the Giants. If you don't play a Week 17 championship, you don't have to worry about Dallas. So they could have a really smooth sail until the end of the season. If Adrian Peterson is ineffective for some reason and Darius Geis becomes the lead back there, he could be one of those guys that you get towards the middle of the season. Maybe you buy low on him and he carries you the rest of the way. Again, flew through some of these here, but talked through each team and kind of what their schedule looked like. Again, these are numbers based off last season. We will continue to look at those and move those numbers over the 2019 information as well. So again, the draft guide, this is just a snippet of what you're going to get from the draft guide. But again, it's fun to talk about the NFL schedule now that it's been released. We can start looking at some of these things, examining some of these things. We got a long time until drafts start taking place, but why not start talking about it right now? Make sure you hit those comments up below. Let us know how you're feeling. What are some, based on this information, what are some fantasy football players that you are going to be targeting that you think could have really good years? What are some ones that you might not be targeting? What are some teams, some stacks that you might be looking at? Let us know in the comments below. We've already talked about hitting that subscribe button and hit the share button down below. Share this video to your favorite social media platform. And do not forget to pre-order your 2019 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Tons of great information. Again, just a snippet of what you've heard tonight will end up being in that draft guide. We're going to go much more in depth, though. So make sure that you're pre-ordering and getting ready for that. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Enjoyed breaking down this information for you. Make sure you catch us on the next video. Have a good one, everyone.